Greetings. This is Management 430, Human Resource Management, and we are moving into our next competency, which is dealing with technology and data analytics and how we use this to help us make good decisions. This also includes the area of HR planning, because HR planning requires us to analyze trends of data and then make decisions about whether or not we're going to hire new people, lay off new people, put a hold on hiring, whatever that might be, where we're going to allocate people, what division and department we're moving them towards. So all of that is part of the analytics process. So we'll start by talking about what is data-informed decision-making and HR analytics, and then move on to the other topics as relevant. So a data-informed decision basically means we collect data, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, and we'll get into what those are in a few moments. But we gather data from a multitude of sources, and we use that data to analyze, to look at the relationships amongst the variables, and then ultimately use that information to make a decision and develop strategies for the organization, particularly in the HR department. We have to be working like scientists. This is about statistical analysis. This is about understanding data, what it tells us, and how we can interpret this to benefit the organization. So we need to make sure we're relying on evidence-based practices, and what that means is things that we know will work, right? Things that we know based on research that A causes B, and if A causes B, this is the solution to your problem. So we can fix A, we can fix B, we can make changes, whatever that is. So the goal is, in all that we're doing in HR, is to make sure that we are using data to drive our decisions, not our guts, not our instinct, but what the data tells us that we are supposed to do, and then we make our recommendations to the organization from there. And that hopefully is supposed to increase overall organizational performance. If our employees are performing well, the organization should perform well. HR analytics then is defined as the analyzing, collecting, and reporting of people-related data. So there's a ton of data that organizations have access to, but what we are focused on as HR professionals is the HR analytics, which is the people data. What's the turnover rate? What's the training rate? What's the success rate? What's the absenteeism rate? What's the accident rate? Those sorts of data that are important to us. And as I said, it can be both quantitative and or qualitative. Qualitative data is more descriptive, and quantitative data is actually numbers that represent a level or a value of some sort. So when I say our satisfaction rate is on a 0 to 10 scale is an 8, that tells us that 8 out of 10 people are satisfied. 80% of the people are satisfied in the company. So that gives us a sense of how to see what those numbers represent. But qualitative is this descriptive part of it. It's not just what we know, but it's like why. Why is it happening? What do people feel about something? So I might ask them, how satisfied are you with your job? And they might say, I'm a 3 out of 7 in terms of my job satisfaction. Then I'm going to ask them a question. Tell me why you scored the number the way you did. Tell me what that means. So we collect some quantitative measures, but then we also want to explore the explanation for it, the description for it, the why it is the way it is. So we need to have both quantitative and qualitative data. And so our goal, of course, in collecting this data is to look at all the systems that are involved. Not only, if we go back to the first competency module where we looked at the HR system module, right? And we looked at stakeholders and operational policies and financial outcomes and the employees and what our HR flow is all about, we are looking at how to understand the way all of these systems and these elements in the system work together to improve performance, improve employee behaviors, minimize our legal obligations, improve profitability and productivity, all those sorts of things. HR analytics is not a one-person job, and in fact, data has to come from multiple sources, and therefore it requires a team of people that are focused on collecting information, collecting the data needed, both quantitative and qualitative, and providing that to the person who is taking on the primary responsibility for doing the analyses. But data comes from all sources. Data is needed to be able to do the analysis and make the decisions. So what does that mean? What are those competency areas that we expect to see with HR analytics? For example, we need to have theory behind why we do things that we do. And these are the things that you're taught in your classes, right? You understand the theory of motivation. You understand the theory of training and development and what it means to train people and what that does for ultimately performance. And so HR professionals, academics like myself, we spend an enormous amount of time looking at the relationships between variables and communicating to organizations that these relationships are the things you need to be paying attention to. Either you want to avoid the issues or you want to embrace the issues, depending on what it is that we're trying to predict. Obviously, if we're predicting accident rates and we know certain factors contribute to accident rates to be higher, then we want to make sure we manage those things that are increasing the accident rate. Vice versa, if we see certain behaviors and activities and practices improve productivity and organizational performance and employee performance, then we want to embrace those ideas and we want to engage with them. But the most important thing is understanding the theories behind it, which is why we have you understand these things, understanding human behavior, understanding social science and psychological theories. And so we ask you to take classes in sociology, and we ask you to take classes in psychology so you understand the underpinnings for how we make those decisions. You also need to have business knowledge. You need to understand the nature of business, what strategy means, what alignment means, what is the function of marketing versus operations. And because again, HR needs to make sure all of these things are managed well. And so we need to understand all the elements and the essence of businesses and business decision making and the drive towards profitability and understanding accounting language. These are all essential for us to be able to do our jobs. So we need to have business knowledge. We also need to know how to manage data and to keep data safe. So we need to work with our IT function who are responsible for having as they're managing the repository of data. And we want to work with cybersecurity to make sure that that data is protected so that when we collect this information, it is not being used inappropriately and is vulnerable, so we can keep that information safe. We want to collect it, store it, and make sure that it's in a safe place for us. We need to know that the essence of psychometrics, which is the study of measurement and what measurement means. We're going to talk in our section on employee talent acquisition about the concepts of reliability and validity. And reliability and validity are two essential things that we need to have in order for us to know that the data is viable and usable. So reliability means that it is repeatable, that if I measure something time and time again, I'm going to have very consistent results. But just because something is consistent doesn't mean it's correct. So we not only have to have it to be reliable, which is consistent, it also needs to be accurate in what it's measuring. So again, it's not enough to just say, well, it's consistent, it's good enough. That's a necessary but not sufficient characteristic. It needs to not only be consistent but also accurately measure the thing that we expect it to measure. We also need to know math and statistical skills. We have to do the data analysis. That might be some basic correlations. It might be just means, medians, and modes. It also might be a more advanced regression analysis, and that's how we can start to assess causality. And A causes B, and our regression analysis has proven to us that A causes B. Now, you should be or will be taking some basic statistics classes, management, MS 250, 251, I believe, is that combination here at SIUE, as well as, data analysis for managers, which is an important class for our managers to take so that you understand how data analysis is done in a more advanced manner. You also need to know employment law. Why? Because if we are doing things and analyzing things that's indicating we have some legal violations going on, we need to correct that. We also want to make sure that we're not advocating, based on the results from our analyses, we're not advocating to do something that's illegal or inappropriate or in violation of employment law. And then lastly, we all know that there is gray area everywhere, and it's very important to understand that we engage in ethical analysis, ethical behaviors. The Society for Human Resource Management, which is the premier institution for HR professionals, as well as the Human Resource Certification Institute. They also, both of those bodies are require ethical components to their certification exams to make sure that we know how to behave in an ethical manner as HR professionals. So we need to also know when we see some gray areas, right, that we don't want to move into that gray area if it is an ethical violation, if you will. So HR analytics is broken down into 3 levels upon which one builds on the other. So we start with descriptive, right, which is the snapshot. What do we see? What are we looking at right now? And so it tells us what is in front of us. It doesn't tell us why it is there. It doesn't tell us anything about interpretations or predictions. It simply describes what it sees. Then we move up to the next level, which is the predictive, right? So from describing information, we now want to look at the relationship between variables. Does this cause this? Does this predict that? Do we find that as this goes up, this goes down? Do we find that as this goes up, the other thing goes up? So depending on what the relationships are between them, again, whether it's a causal relationship or a correlational relationship, we want to be able to predict the relationships between the variables, and then ultimately to be able to prescribe recommendations based on that. So if we know A causes B and B is something that we want to make sure that we are influencing A to predict B to occur. And so that's the prescription, right? It's like if we know that this is going to happen, then this is what we want our behaviors to be focused on, is improving this so that it will have the outcome that we want. So again, we start with descriptive, then we do the predictive when we look at the relationship between the variables, and then ultimately, once we know the relationship, we then will prescribe certain behaviors and activities that guides what people should be doing in order to get the outcomes that we want.